Rich people marrying someone poor? What struck you most about your significant other's lifestyle? I dated a rich lady a while back. She was always very surprised that I would voluntarily eat fast food. When we first moved in together, I noticed that my significant other was charging her portion of the rent on her credit card, and yet had no plan for how she was going to pay that money back. I got bad news for you. Her plan is you. In his surroundings, insurance is something only rich people can afford. And I'm not talking about health, or rather not just health, but car insurance. It was perfectly normal for everyone he knew to drive without insurance. I live with my girlfriend, who was an early child and grew up in very poor conditions. Sometimes I just want to eat rice and vegetables, but she is always against it because she doesn't want to go back to poverty. My girlfriend once said, "I finally made enough money to pay the rent," which meant today I had enough money to pay the rent. And I realized that's a whole accomplishment for a lot of people who don't have a fixed income salary. This is wildly familiar to me. It's always been like that for me. And then there's that fear that you are going to go shopping, start paying with your card, and there won't be enough money. I'm over 30, and I think I've achieved some kind of financial stability. But still, I just can't get over it. Every time I go to online banking and see my account information loading, I feel the strongest sympathetic nervous system reaction. Even though my years of insecurity seem to be long behind me, I can't stand the feeling. Once I was in love with my best friend from uni who was always out of money. One day when I already had a good job for my birthday, I decided to go on a trip and take him with me. It didn't immediately come to my attention that this was the first such trip in his life. His parents couldn't afford anything like this. So even as an adult, he couldn't even think of traveling of any kind. It's not so much that I'm rich as my husband is poor. He comes from a very poor Mexican village and used to tell me a story about how he had to use leaves instead of toilet paper and bathe outside because they had no sewage system at home. You see, there are poor people and then there is my husband. It's now been 12 years since he moved to the US. Man, at first it was so interesting to watch his childish reactions to our lives. A regular trip to the movies was a whole event for him. Heating up a meal in the microwave was some kind of alien concept to him. If we stayed in nice hotels, his reaction was always, wow. Even now, he's occasionally surprised by little things. And every time it reminds me that I shouldn't take my middle-class status for granted. I used to date a girl from a very poor family. I was always very surprised by her habit of spending money on nonsense. She was always getting into credit card debt like it was nothing. We've been dating a long time. One thing I don't understand about pets. Her family lives in a trailer, yet they always have a bunch of pets that they spend the lion's share of their income on. My wife was born and raised in the USSR. She is still baffled by the current abundance of fresh fruit, as if it were some kind of extravagant luxury. I represent the poor side in this matter. It used to surprise me how my wife reacts calmly to car breakdowns, utility bills, torn clothes, and so on. Growing up, we lived below the poverty line, and a trivial tire change was just a disaster for us. To cope with such problems, you either had to budget in detail or just accept your plight. When my wife's phone broke one day, I went into a panic, and she shrugged and said, "Okay, we'll pick up a new one after lunch." And so we did. In my case, I come from a very affluent family, and my boyfriend comes from a poor one. A couple months ago, we bought a new TV, and out of the blue, it broke. But since my boyfriend bought the warranty, which I never did myself, I didn't think warranties worked at all. He decided to fight for a replacement TV. He ended up talking to support for 3 days, spent about 5 hours on it, and they finally agreed to a replacement. I realize that this may sound like I'm being overfed, but I certainly would never do it myself. That story taught me a lot. Sandwiches. One time I made my husband a sandwich in which I put one thin slice of meat. He couldn't believe I'd been eating sandwiches like that all my life. My wife didn't grow up in a rich family, but she didn't grow up poor either. Her favorite thing to do used to be to grab a jar of peanut butter and eat it from there, and I could never afford to eat peanuts and butter without something, like bread. Little things like that are wildly noticeable. When I first started dating my future wife, I was working as a teacher, and it just so happened that my wife earned many times more than I did. Sometimes she had to drive my 10-year-old black Honda Civic that my cousin gave me until I got a better one. She was very surprised at how much more aggressive people become towards you when you drive an ugly old car. As soon as she got out of the car, the curse was immediately lifted. She respected me wildly after that. She thought my coolness to this behavior made me a saint. I was constantly braked by traffic cops, someone was always mad at me, and pedestrians could also easily say something unpleasant to me. Now I've got a new Honda, it's 1 year old, and everything is different. I drive about the same as before, maybe even a little more aggressive because I cannot hear the wind when driving faster than 60 kilometers per hour. But the cops don't stop me. Nobody's rude to me. I haven't had any unpleasant situations on the road for a long time. And by the way, my wife is much more willing to trade cars with me now. Oh, I have an answer for that. Not that I grew up in a very wealthy family, but my family is definitely affluent. My husband was born in Nicaragua, but after a while his mom moved to Texas and then barely held him and her second son. Here are a few things that amaze me. First, he never has a kink. At all. They used to always have little food in their kitchen, often had to go hungry. He told me that they had an occasion when there was only one egg left of food, which he later had to share with his brother. Their mother would sit next to them and look at them with hungry eyes. Second, he is very easily impressed by all sorts of little things. When he was a kid, he only had one toy, a truck. And now every time I buy him something, he thinks it's the most amazing thing in the world. And he always keeps everything. Third, he's the hardest working person of everyone I know. He doesn't want to be where he came from anymore. Fourth, he is the most honorable and optimistic person I have ever met. We've been through a lot of problems, family fights, problems at work, selling the house, and so on. Nothing can break him. He's always calm. He's always asking everybody, "Have you eaten today? Do you have a place to sleep? Somebody loves you?" That means you're better than most people. God, I love him so much, he makes me see the world in a whole new way. To be honest, her excessive food anxiety. When we first got married, she was very uncomfortable all the time when we ran out of food at our house. She wasn't overeating, nothing like that, she just didn't feel right. All from having to go hungry a lot as a kid. And from a funny thing, she can't stand camping. When I'm asking why, she always says, "You went camping because you had fun, and I went camping because I couldn't afford a hotel." Even though I come from a poorer family, not super poor, but compared to my wife's parents who just have a shitload of money, I am very poor, but I think I can answer for her. We have 2 kids. When I once suggested looking for toys and clothes for them at the local flea market and garage sales, she was just shocked. The idea had never occurred to her. She never thought she could save some money and buy things at a sale. Now she loved them so much that she sometimes questioned if she should buy a new thing. Before, she would have gone straight to Amazon or drive to the store. I just wish her parents think it is disgusting that we put our kids in used clothes. But they don't pay my bills, So my husband grew up in a family that lived quite comfortably, but they were on a very tight budget. They have 6 kids in their family and the mom is disabled. And my family never had any restrictions. One time we were walking around the store and he, as usual, started insisting that we go through all the grocery aisles. It ended up taking so long that I couldn't stand it and asked him why he was doing this. He replied, "We used to only have $100 a week for food for the whole family. Every time I took something off the counter, I had to put it back because I didn't have the money. Now I can afford anything I want. That's why I like to look at everything I can buy." It took 10 years for him to tell me that. At that point, I felt like a horrible person. My wife never uses credit cards, which is very strange to me because I've always been encouraged to get myself a credit card and use it, and as often as possible to increase my credit history. We always had money to pay off my loans, so it made sense to me to, first, build up my credit history, and the second, to accumulate flights slowly. When we moved out with my spouse, I found that she only used debit cards and cash. She had a credit card for emergencies, but avoided it in every way possible. It was still quite some time before I was able to dispel her skepticism about credit cards. Fortunately, we both have very well-paying jobs. But I have to say, she also made me realize what it means to have a financial cushion. Why pay for something with a credit card when you have plenty of cash? Answer: to build a credit history sounds pretty weird if you think of it. It turns out you're taking out a completely unnecessary loan to show that you're handling money responsibly. I come from an affluent American family, and my husband comes from a poor Southeast Asian family. It blows my mind how poor they used to be. He told me that sometimes all they ate was rice and sugar because there was no money for meat. I just figured. Their family of 5 had to live on about 50 cents a day. I'm also from a Southeast Asian family. Rice, soy sauce, and vegetables are our everything. I had one funny incident, only I'm kind of on the poor side. My husband, that time just my boyfriend, took me out to a very nice restaurant. The waiter brought me a Caesar salad and asked if I wanted him to add some pepper. I said sure, and he started sprinkling. Only problem was, I didn't know I needed to tell him enough. My husband realized this at some point, but didn't do anything about it right away because he wanted to see how it would turn out. Of course, he ended up telling me that I should stop the waiter. But in the meantime, I had a thought in my head like, well, maybe that's how they eat Caesar? I was really unaware because the only salad I've ever tried before was cabbage with mayonnaise dressing, and it was still pretty tasty, but the pepper was a little too much. Thank you very much for watching. In the comments below the video, you can share your similar story. Plus, I suggest you watching our other episodes. Bye-bye.